Also a statement about when you refinance, what could be that implication for your property taxes. Generally speaking, if you're just doing financing and changing the terms of a loan, we do not reassess for that. But you do have to be very careful when people are filling out paperwork, they're not changing how you hold the title of the property. When you start putting names on the property or taking names off the property, that can be a game changer because it could result in percentage increases. So I just want to throw those things out there before we get to the heart of really what I want to discuss today. So property tax savings is one of the ways, like I said, to establish our financial goals. And recently what happens is we want to make sure that we can get these savings. And how do we do that? Because a lot of what we do is dictated by law. It's dictated by Revenue and Taxation Code section. But when you're armed with knowledge and information, you know how to best utilize that to legally lower your tax, what you have to pay in taxes. So one is just understand the property tax system, which is complicated. But we have lots of tools to do that. And one of the things is us coming out and getting education on it. You just have to ask questions. That's always the best thing to do. You have to anticipate the types of tax bills. So basically what happens is when you buy a property, what people do is they go through escrow. And usually what happens in escrow, they put aside some taxes. What sometimes people don't understand is those taxes are for the old bills that are already out there. They're not based on your new property tax. So what happens is you're gonna get some supplemental tax bills. And those are gonna probably come months after you moved into your home. And so it's important that you understand those tax bills will most likely come. And that's an instance where someone sells me their house, their assessment was lower, I buy it for more. There's going to be supplemental tax bills that come my way. You get prepared for those. Depending on when you buy, you may have one supplemental tax bill or you may have two, but you have to be aware of those. Something else people need to understand is if you build something, let's say you add a bathroom or you add square footage to your home, we are going to reassess that. Let's say you said I did it, but I didn't pull a permit for it. We don't care. You added on that square footage, so it's still going to be accessible. So those are important things to know. And then the whole thing about not having a permit, that's a whole nother issue that you have to deal with building and safety. But the fact that you added it does cause a reassessment. So again, I think the key piece of it is to really understand these events and how they may impact you. But the key today is really going to talk about exclusions and exemptions. So we're going to jump more into that. Next slide, please. So everyone wants to know about Proposition 19. One of the things you need to know is Proposition 19 is fairly new. We voted for it, and by we, a majority of California voters voted that they wanted this proposition to pass. And it became effective as of February 16, 2021 for one component we'll talk about. The other component became effective as of April 1st, 2021. But it's very consequential. It was a game changer. And so when we talk about it, the two main components is the one we call intergenerational transfers, and by that I mean family transfers. My mother has a property, she wants to give it to me by inheritance, or she wants to give it to me. That would be a family transfer, right? So the reason why it's really important is prior to the passage of this, you actually had more ways that you could pass property from parent to child and not be reassessed. Proposition 19 actually starts to limit those types of transactions. You can still do them, but you're going to get reassessed in terms of property taxes. Okay, so we talk about who can do it, parents to children, and in some instances, grandparents can do it. That would probably be an instance where, let's say, sadly, I passed away, but my mother wanted to give the property to my son. She could do that because I'm not there. Let's say though my mom just doesn't want to give me the property and she likes my son better, she can do that, but it's going to be reassessed because the way the statute's written, I can't be alive. Okay? Just as an example. So the other thing is this exclusion now only applies if it's your principal residence, your family home. So this only applies to the home that you live in. Prior to Prop 19, when it came to family transfers, let's say I had a duplex or apartment building. Prior to this change, I could actually give that to my son and he could get the exclusion up to $1 million of assessed value. Prop 19 has removed that. So if I have a transfer and it happened after February 16, 2021, the only way I can get this exclusion for property taxes is if it's the principal home it's my principal home. Okay, so that's a very important piece of it. Next slide, please. So again, you must move in the property too. So before what would happen is, let's say I had a property and my mom wanted to give the property to me. She gave it to me. I already have a home. I don't want to move into the property, but I want to rent it, right? I want to make it a rental property. Now with the passage of Prop 19, if it's a rental property, it does not qualify for the exclusion, because the new requirements require that, one, I have to move into the house after my mom gets it, and I have to apply for a homeowner's exemption or a veteran's exemption and claim those exemptions. Not just be eligible for them, I actually have to claim them. And this all has to happen in 1 year. There's also a $1 million threshold, and we'll give some examples so we can explain it. But basically what that $1 million threshold means, if the fair market value is really high, I may not get that low base my mother had. I'll have an incrementally higher base that I have to deal with. Okay? Next slide. So let's jump into this to give an example. And so essentially, if we're looking at this, let's say my parents' home was worth $400,000 in terms of assessed value. That means their taxes are based on $400,000. The 1% is applied to that to get the taxes plus voting indebtedness, direct assessments, all of that on the tax bill. But it's based on their assessment at $400,000. Now, my mom gives me the property because she's a great mom, I'm a great daughter. And at that point in time, the market value of the house at that time is $900,000. Okay? So written in the language, it says it's $1 million threshold. So the good thing is, since the property is less than $1 million, the fair market value, as of when she gave it to me, it's $900,000. Ding, 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 ding. I get to keep her base value of $400K. Now, of course, every year it can go up by 2% because Prop 13, but I get to keep her base. I'm not being assessed at $900,000, which would more than double my tax bill. Okay? So let's go to the second example. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the second example is a little bit different. Same thing. My mom's assessed value is at $400,000, but this time the market value of the home is $1.2 million. A lot greater, right? And if you can see now, we look at that threshold of $1 million, my new market value, what I could sell it for today, what the appraiser said it's worth, is now $1.2 million. It exceeds the threshold by $200,000. So what's going to happen is you take the $200,000 plus my mom's $400,000. My new tax bill is going to be based on $600,000. It's higher, but it's not $1.2 million. So that's pretty much in very simple terms how that works. A couple of other things that are really important is sometimes you get the question is, what if my mom, there's my sister, myself, I have a sister named Sylvia, what if she gave the property to both of us? Do we both have to move into the house to get this exclusion? I have to live with Sylvia now? No, you don't. Only one of the siblings or heirs has to move in the property, but they have to stay in that property continuously. So let's say if I move in and then finally, we both keep it in both our names, and then after 5 years, I'm like, you know what? I want to get married and move to Kenya. I don't know, I'm going to move out there. But Sylvia's willing to move into the house and take the exclusion. She can do that and we're going to keep the same base share value. But if we decide to move out and rent the property, what do you think happens? It gets reassessed. We go back to that $1.2 million as of when you move out. We trade it all the way forward and we say, here's your new tax bill. So this exclusion only applies while you have the heir, the eligible heir, living in the property. As soon as they move out and there's no eligible heirs living in the property, it gets reassessed as of the lien date, which means our January 1st date, it gets reassessed. So that's really important, and that's a game changer, because under the old family exclusion, Prop 58-193, you could rent it out, you could move out, you could have different property types, but that no longer exists. So I think it's really important that people understand that. And again, this is as of February 16th, 2021. If something happened before then, let's say that for whatever reason, let's say sadly your mother passed away 2 years ago, you didn't contact the assessor's office, which is a no-no we'll talk about later on, but it was before the February 16th date, you're gonna fall underneath the old rules. Does that make sense? You're gonna use all those older rules, which means you have more benefit. Okay, next slide, please. So let's now talk about the base year value transfers. These are very different because, again, we're talking about base year value transfers. These are transfers that allow someone to take their base. I live in one home, I want to move someplace else and sell it and go to another home. It allows you to do that. And who's able to do this? Well, these are or. If you're 55 years of age, or you're disabled, or you're a victim of a governor-declared wildfire or a natural disaster, then this is something you can take advantage of. There's a couple of key things about it. Now, when we talk about the family transfers or intergenerational transfers, basically Prop 19 restricted those benefits and requirements and made them more stringent. When it comes to base year value transfers, it expanded them. So some of the key components are, if you have this one, what it's going to allow you to do is now you can move anywhere in California. Before, there were only about 10 or 11 counties that participated. Now, if I want to move to Monterey or San Diego or any of those, San Luis Obispo, wherever, I can now move my base year value to that other county, and they have to accept it because it's now statewide. The other thing is I can do this 3 times. So that means if I had to move, let's say I had to move for a medical reason, let's say I wanted to move because I was want to be closer to family or grandchildren, etc. I could move that base 3 times, 3 separate times. The other piece of this, I guess those are all the key points for that one, right? And then there's also going to be another value calculation we'll talk about with some of our examples. Next slide, please. Okay, one other point I wanted to make on the other one though is also too, this one actually became effective, has a different effective date. The date is April 1st, 2021. So we're talking about base year value transfer. One, we have to have someone we either buy something and we sell something. 2 parts of this transaction. So one of the questions when this first passed is, well, wait a minute, what if someone buys the property first and they do it in 2020, has been within 2 years, and then let's say 2 years later on the other side, after Prop 19 became effective, they decide to sell. Do they get Prop 19, the new Prop 19 base year value, or do they get the old? And the answer is you get the new. So as long as you do one side of the transaction by one side and you either sell or buy, on either side of April 1st, 2021, you're gonna get the more loose rules. Why is that important? Prior to Prop 19 passing, if you wanted to do this, you had to either have something, buy a home that was of equal or lesser value. So you couldn't buy up. The market value of the new home couldn't be greater. Now it can. So that's a big change. So this is basically telling you this, that basically now instead of me having to buy something that was either a little bit smaller or worth less, now I can actually buy something that's worth more, but I'm gonna have a tax benefit. I'm gonna have a tax increase associated with that. Let's go through the examples. I think the examples help. So let's say Mary has a home and it's assessed at $400,000 and she decides to move because you know what, Mary has this 2-story house and it's hard to climb the stairs. She said, I need a 1-story. So she decides to sell her house and she sells it for $1 million. Mary buys a house and it's worth $800,000. She submits a claim, because remember none of these are automatic. She provides proof of age, because you gotta give us documentation so we can verify that you get it. And she's approved. In this instance, because if you look at this, Mary's new home that she purchased is less than the home that she sold. She's gonna be able to move the base value from her old house to her new house, and it's gonna be worth $400,000. So she gets to keep that low assessment. So this incentivizes, Mary at this point in time needs to get into the smaller house because, it's just getting too hard for her to navigate through that house. She's able to make that sale, get the one-story house, and not get her tax basis changed, right? It carries over. Let's see another example though. Now on the next example though, now Mary has her home assessment, it says at $400,000. We know her house is gonna sell for $1 million. But Mary says, you know what, I want to move to Oakland and be next to my grandbabies. This time though, when she buys the house, the home that she's purchasing for a replacement property, it's worth $1,200,000. That's worth more than her old house she moved out of. And it's worth more fair market value by $200,000. So in this case, you're going to take the difference, you're going to add it to her old assessment, and now she's going to get to move to Oakland with her babies. But her tax base is going to be $600,000. And this is again going to be between counties, because Mary lives in Los Angeles County, but now all the other 58 counties in the state have to accept her ratio value. Okay, so next slide. So I just want to kind of go over a couple of really important things when it comes to you being able to apply for exclusions and for exclusions to be granted. And some of those are that, one, they are not automatic. You don't automatically get a base year value exclusion. You don't automatically get an intergenerational or family exclusion. You have to apply and submit a claim form for all of these. There's also very important deadlines. When it comes to base year value transfers, first of all, I should note that they have to be within 2 years. So if you buy and sell, you have 2 years to do that. You can't be more than that. When we talk about intergenerational ones, we talk about that 1 year. 1 year becomes really important because now, based on Prop 19, if your parent gives you your home, you have to move into that home and claim the homeowner's exemption or veteran's exemption within a year. Missing these deadlines could mean that you do not get the exclusion, which would mean with that $1.2 million we were talking about, that's what your assessment is going to be legal up to. I think the other things that are importantly is that this was mentioned, thank you, Ms. Perry, when we were talking about when you have forms. When you go through escrow, oftentimes you're filling out the preliminary change of ownership form, the P-Core. It asks you all these questions. It asks you, are you 55 years of age or older? Is this your principal residence? And people say, why do I have to give them all this information? And sometimes what happens is people just mark no all the way down. The problem with that is that we use that form to proactively determine if you are eligible for an exclusion. So if we see that you marked on your form as a principal place of residence, the assessor's office will proactively send you a claim form and say, hey, you might be eligible for this, just so you know. If you say no, we assume none of those things apply. We assume it's just 100% transfer and we go ahead and we reassess you. We pick out the value at 100% market, it goes to tax collector and they see no bill. And oftentimes what happens is once someone gets a bill, they go, wait a minute, I thought I was gonna get an exclusion. And they have to go through that process. So I just want to make the point, these are not automatic. There are no exemptions, questions in it, that's not true. But the ones that we're gonna talk about today, none of the ones I'm talking about today are automatic exemptions. And there's other things that we ask you out in that form that are really important. Like how are you holding title, is it joint tenancy? There's other types of exemptions and exclusions. So by filling out that document accurately and completely, you help yourself and you help us help you get tax savings that you're due. But it's really important. And by completely, I mean, not only should you sign it, make sure you put your email information, really important in this day and age. It's an easy way for us to communicate to you, accurate phone numbers, etc. Okay, so when someone's going through and it's hard because in escrow there's so many papers flying, just see this is just as important documents as all the other documents you're reviewing and signing, and ensure that it's being completed correctly, especially if someone else is completing it for you. Okay, next slide please. Okay, the other thing is we were talking primarily about Prop 19, but I did want to share some information because a lot of times people just don't know this. And sadly, when someone passes, that's really not the time we're thinking about the assessor or taxes or any of those things, but it's still important. And so what people don't know is that when someone passes, they own a property, that is a change in ownership. And you're really supposed to notify us 150 days, within 150 days of that happening. Usually though, we hear years later. The problem is, just because we hear years later, doesn't mean you don't owe taxes going years back. You do, most of the time. And so that becomes even more of a stressor because now you've gone through this whole grieving process and everything else, and then sometimes you decide I'm gonna sell the property, or now we're gonna deal with everything, and you realize you have years and years of bills that are outstanding. So, one thing you need to know, if someone passes, you need to contact the assessor's office, and we have a form that's called Death of Real Property Owner. So that becomes really important. And there might be exclusions that you can get. Those time-sensitive things, you need to contact us so you can make sure you can apply for those timely so you can get all of the benefit. The other thing we often hear is the property's in a trust, you're not going to worry about it. Trusts don't own property. So even though it's in a trust, you still need to contact us. So that becomes really important. So I just wanted to share that, and we actually have some handouts and things at our table that talk about that. I think you guys may have received some of those. If not, there's more things at the table. But really on our website, we have a lot of information talking about death of real property owner. We've been trying to do some partnerships with the Election Recorder's Office. So when people file for death certificates, they realize there's more that needs to be done. And actually on their website, there's more information there as well. The other thing I want to share a little information about, next slide please, is just the homeowner's exemption. The homeowner's exemption is something that if it's your principal residence, you live in it, it's an exemption that you have to file for, but it will save you $70 a year. And some people say, well, who cares about $70 a year? Well, I'm going to tell you, I care about my $70 a year because maybe that $70 a year I put in my 401k, I put in a savings account, but you have to file for it. And most people do not claim their homeowner's exemption. So essentially what it does is it's going to take and exempt $7,000 of your assessed value, which equates to about $70 in taxes. And once you apply for it, as long as you live in the house, you don't have to keep applying for this year after year. It's going to stay on the property until you actually request that we remove it or you move out of the property. Right, so it'll stay on the property. And remember, we start talking about the family transfers. This homeowner exemption becomes important because it's a vital part of it. You have to claim the homeowner's exemption in order to be considered for the intergenerational or family exclusion. So I talked about a lot of information. I also just looked at one last slide, and basically what you'll see is you'll see our contact information, but first of all, thank you. You can ask questions, but we have our contact information here. Our website has a good amount of information, actually a plethora of information. So for all of the topics I've talked about, Proposition 19, homeowner's exemption, death of real property owner, there's all that information plus on our website. It's very interactive. We also have lots of videos that talk about Prop 19. We have posted videos before that we were trying to anticipate what it looked like. We also had people come in, attorneys, et cetera, to talk about the impacts of Proposition 19 and how it may impact people in their estate planning. And I think the one thing I want to say is that whenever we're making any kind of financial decisions, we have to always think about and get as much information. I'm giving you information that's specifically talking about it in terms of property taxes. But whenever you're making some kind of decision, you have to also think about all the other things, in terms of your family. Like for instance, when you have a family member that's sick, you have to think about what that's going to look like, and those decisions may be different for different families. Like I said, so Prop 19, it may make sense for me to go ahead and hold onto the property and one child moves in. For another family, maybe that's not going to be the best thing for them, but you have to at least understand that. The other thing is we're talking about property taxes. Nothing I'm saying has anything to do with federal taxes, gift taxes, or any of those other things at the federal level. So you really have to make as best informed decisions as you can. That really concludes all of the information that I had in terms of the slide. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain those.